Hello, and welcome to another edition of our Journey Toward Building Wealth. I am Sheila Wilkinson-Sanders. In our previous edition, we were beginning the discussion about reducing student loan debt or eliminating student loan debt and the dangers and the damage that student loan debt can do when you're trying to build your credit or begin using other people's money to build your wealth. And today I want to continue on that discussion with ways that you can reduce or eliminate student loan debt, and actually ways that I personally utilized for my two daughters, who both were able to graduate from college debt-free. One of the great things that I utilized for both of them was a thing called the Kiddie condo. And what a Kiddie condo is that it's the mechanism that you can utilize where you use your credit and your money and your child's credit, which theoretically, if you use that when they first enter college, they have really good credit because they have no credit. And so they don't have, some people say that when you first get out of high school and you turn 18 that you have perfect credit. It's not really perfect credit, because if you remember back several years ago when we started our discussion about credit, there's the 5 C's of credit. And so when you first get your credit, you don't actually have those 5 C's because you have no history. But because you have no history, as an 18-year-old, you have really good credit, and because there is no debt out there, and there's no bad history, there's no history. So generally speaking, it should be, from a credit standpoint, pretty easy for your child to get a mortgage from a credit standpoint. And if you have halfway decent credit and some money in the bank or some ability to show that you have the ability to pay, then generally speaking you should be able to get a mortgage for your child. Now the Kiddie condo, is a little deceptive in that people think, oh, I have to buy a condo. You don't. You can buy any type of real estate. You can buy a home, you can buy a townhome, you could buy a 2-flat, or you could buy a condo. And generally speaking, what you want to do is to try to buy that piece of property close to the campus. Now, timing is everything, and so as I go through and I tell you the advantages to having a Kiddie condo, I want you to keep in mind that one of the big advantages, if your child, or if you're the one, are going to go to college outside of your home state, and if you purchase the property before you go to that college, you should be able to then apply to that college as an in-state student. Now, obviously that gets difficult if you haven't been accepted to the college. And if you've been accepted to the college, it still gets a little tricky because you do your application in the state where you live and then you switch it over. But if you do that before you start college, and I encourage you to call the university and call the counselors to get advice on at what point can you become a state resident and get state tuition before you start college. There is a point in time where you could apply for your home state and then switch over to that state and get in-state tuition. So for those of you that are leaving your state to go to another state, it could be huge. Your tuition could go down 50%. Or in some states even more, if you are an in-state student as opposed to an out-of-state student. So that's one of the big advantages to having a Kiddie condo, is automatically just the reduction in your student loan debt. Second advantage. So let's say that you purchase a 3-bedroom home. Now, you or your student have 2 extra bedrooms. And those 2 extra bedrooms can be rented out to other students on campus. So now you become a landlord. Your student becomes a landlord. But if you plan it correctly, if you do your research, if you do your calculations correctly, your mortgage should be paid for. So your student or you are now living rent-free. So there's no board, right? As far as there's no room, rather, as far as room and board. And that can be a huge number when it comes to college tuition, not having to pay that room and board. Now, if you calculate it and you do it correctly, not only should you have the money so that you pay the mortgage and all the other expenses associated with that property, but there should be enough money left for the board. So for the food and not only that, but for the spending money. And so what I did with my first child was that I just opened up an account and the rent was deposited into that account, the mortgage was paid, and then the extra money was her spending money. So I didn't have to worry about her calling me when she still did. But I didn't worry about on a regular basis her calling me and saying, Mommy, I need, money for gas, or I need money for food, or I need money to buy clothes, or whatever the case may be. Because the money that was being collected in rent covered the mortgage and those expenses. What an awesome thing. Now, I had 2 different situations with each daughter. With the first daughter, what was awesome was that at the end of her term, when she graduated, I was able to sell the property, sell the townhome, and the money that was left over after the sale was used to pay off the final of her school bills. And so she was able to proudly graduate and even announce at her cum laude ceremony that she was one of the few students on campus that was graduating debt-free. For my second child, I wasn't so fortunate to be able to sell her property at a profit. She actually ended up leaving that school before she graduated. But it was close enough to campus, and it was a nice enough property that it stayed occupied with not 2 tenants, but with 3 tenants. So I actually had money coming in over and above the expenses of the property to still, again, pay for expenses for her back in her hometown. But it's a great concept. Now, the other idea behind why you have your child on that loan, on that Kiddie condo loan, is because they are an owner-occupant, you can do an owner-occupant loan. And if you are familiar with this, or if you're not familiar with this, if you buy a property as an investment property, your interest rate is higher because it's a higher risk, because the thought process is, well, if you're not living in the property, you don't really care as much about that property, you don't really care if something happens or if it goes into default. You're not in the property, so you're not taking as well care of the property and all. But with a Kiddie condo, because the child is living in the home, then the property investment is not as big of a risk. So you get the interest rate as if you are owner-occupant, as a homeowner. Also, by having your child in the property, now is owner-occupied, so you get homeowners exemptions. So you have lower property taxes. But you also get the advantages of the tax write-offs that you would get as an investment property. So it's a great investment, and whether you sell it at the end of the term of you or your child in school, or if you keep it afterwards as a rental investment property, you can find there are many financial advantages to having that Kiddie condo. So I want you to consider that very carefully. And again, we talked about, applying early and planning early for your child's college education. And this is just one other thing that you should consider and do for your child when going away to school. I always want to tell all sides of the story. And so there could be some downfalls. I think it's good, especially if you go to an HBCU, I think it's always good to experience being on campus. And so for both of my kids, they spent their first year on campus because I just thought it was a good thing for them to do, to be on campus, to experience that life. So you could still purchase that property. Maybe it's over the summer that your child lives in the property. And then you have the rental property for that year. You can still establish that residency by making sure that they live in that property long enough for it to be considered their property. And then they still get to experience campus life for that first year. For some, they just go immediately into and live on it. But that was just me personally. I thought that it was important. I think they both appreciated having a Kiddie condo much more once they had lived on campus and the challenges of living on campus. But it also was a learning and a growing experience for them. And again, for some, they have had the problems of selling it. But again, if you buy the property strategically close to campus where the students who would be renting can still get to that property relatively easily and get to campus, most students feel more grown and more responsible if they can live off campus. And if they can live in a really nice house or townhome or even condo, they appreciate that. So as always, I hope this has been beneficial to you. I love real estate, and so the whole Kiddie condo concept is something that was really dear to me and dear to my kids when they were in their college days. And so I hope it's beneficial to you. Remember to stay faithful. Remember to stay focused. Remember to stay committed. I'm Sheila Wilkinson-Sanders. I hope you have a wonderfully blessed and supreme day.